Leave aside the little thoughts. Leave aside everything that is distracting you from the depth of your soul. Let this be a holy time in a community of seekers, and together let us find our Sabbath.
Please join me in saying the words to accompany lighting of our chalice. We light our chalice as a beacon of hope, a sign of our quest for truth and meaning. We light our chalice as a beacon of love in celebration of the life we share together.
Our readings this morning come from a book called Poems Celebrating Poets, edited by Kwame Alexander, illustrated by Akua Holmes. And we've heard from a few people that Janet's microphone sounds a little bit distant. So I'm just saying that now. We're working on figuring that out and fixing it. The first poem that we're going to share with you today is called Spin a Song by Marjorie Wentworth, and it's written to celebrate the poet Rumi. Walk out of your room beneath the morning sky. Let the sun enter your heart and find a way to keep it there. Make a song from the light falling through the air and dance even when you are alone. Dance if you are still sad. Dance when you are tired. Dance until your feet lift off the ground like wings. And later when the stars are spinning in the night, put your ear to the ground and listen to the songs rising up from the earth. Everywhere you go, there is music.
This is called A Field of Roses, and it's celebrating Emily Dickinson, and it was written by Chris Colby. I keep an old verse in my room that says, believing in roses makes them bloom. I know enough of life's toil to say it also takes rich, fertile soil, lots of good old-fashioned care and rain to make roses blossom in air. Here's a beautiful red field rose. I'd say the loveliest anyone knows.
And the next poem is called Loving the World and Everything in It, written by Marjorie Wentworth. And this one celebrates Mary Oliver. Each day I walk out into the damp grass before the sun has spoken, because I love the world and the miracle of morning. I love to stand beside the old oak trees beneath a symphony of birdsong and listen to every perfect note, while the wind passes around me like a warm sea. Sometimes a feather drifts down into my hands. I hold it and imagine flying.
You might be able to tell we're having some technical difficulties today. This is a poem, a summer poem by a woman named Carolyn Miller. It's called Dark, Starry, Sticky Night, Missouri. When I was a child, this is not the poem. When I was a child, summer was always a time to dream, to let things slow down. And it was the only time I was ever allowed to stay up late and look at the stars. Somehow this poem evokes that for me. It's like falling into warm molasses, a dark sweetness in which you can barely breathe. It's like being drowned in blackness, thick and moving in slow waves around you, while above you shine the steady light of stars, and around you flicker the floating, intermittent lights of lightning bugs. The smell of flowers grows even stronger on the warm tide of the night. All of summer welling into a flood of fragrance, a heavy mixture of sex and sorrow, and everywhere cicadas and crickets are rasping out their brief sentient lives. And off in the woods, a whippoorwill keeps calling that each moment is sweeter and more precious than any you will ever taste again.
When the hills do falter, when the sun questions if his glory be perfect one. Even as herself, oh friend, I will love you. The grass so little has to do, a sphere of simple green, with only butterflies to brood, and bees to entertain, and stir all day to pretty tunes. The breezes fetch along, and oh, the sunshine in its lap, and bow to everything. And thread the dews all night like pearls, and make itself so fine. A duchess were to come for such a noticing. And even when it dies, to pass in odors so divine, has lovely spices gone to sleep, or amulets of pine. wish I were the hay.
And now is the time in the service where we invite you to greet everyone. It's our community greeting. So you can type a greeting into the chat, and we are going to test Janet's microphone again. She's going to read some of them off to you. And I see many of you turning your videos on. So for those of you who know how to do it, you may want to click into gallery view, and that way you'll be able to see a lot of people. The gallery view is on the top right of your screen, and it's 9 little squares. I've heard it described like a waffle. So if you would like to turn your cameras on so we can see you, you are welcome to, and you can greet. So I see a hi from Turtle Island. Hi, Craig. Hi, Diane. Good morning from Ginny Furinger. Mark and Martin say hello. They're visiting from Colorado and will be moving to South Hadley in July. Oh, that's very exciting. Oh, and some people, if you aren't able to turn on your video now, you can put that into the chat to me and I can work on turning yours on for you. Oh, good morning from Puffer's Pond, from Nancy and Jane. Forward to seeing everybody on Sundays. And it sounds like Janet is trying to talk right now and we cannot hear her. Gail Herman says, good to be here again, so wonderful. Good morning to Jean, Margot, and Simona. Nice to see you.
All right, here we go. Can you hear me? Yes. Now can you hear me? Hello, everybody. Joanna, is that? Everyone's frozen. I give up.
I've got it coming through my speaker.
Are you hearing me? Can you hear me, Dan? That's not through here?
It's not any better, Janet. Thank you all for your patience and help with this. And now she's
Hello,
frozen.
Jessica, can you hear me?
I can hear her. All right, I think at this point, let's turn off videos so that we can see if we can get Janet moving and see if we can hear her. Thanks for the feedback in the chat. We may just keep switching computers around. Nice to see everyone. Thanks for turning on your videos today. And we will be dealing with the technical difficulties for a moment, I think. Like, okay.
So with death tolls a regular feature of the news, we're in a time when we're confronted with both loss and our own mortality. And as has become our custom, we'll now honor and acknowledge our personal losses by reading the names of people, mostly who have died in the past year or so, people who have mattered to some or many of you. Robert Graham, Shirley Ellis Cummings, Margie Wyckoff Baruch, Richard Kirk, Ursula Snow, Maurice Harmon, Frank, Sonia and Lynn Holswit, Jane Klimczak, Geraldine William, John Prine, Terrence McNally, Avery and Austin True Commando, Ahmad Arbery, Fred Willard, Jack Rosenblum. Ruth Leshen, Sheila Kalisher, Rosalind Loisel, and Yasmin Talman Gobble.
Suzanne Anderson, Mary Hale, Ginny Robinson, Dana Wright, Cheryl, Maria Yankovic, Barbara Crossman, Richard Cowden, Francis Crowe, Lee Swanson, John Kaufman, John Weir, Charlotte Grant, Carl Crow.
Ariel Bork, Carol Zuvers, Audrey Leaf, Tess Collins, Navaya Molina, Eleanor Fostick Downs, Estelle Boston, Joel Dansky, Roger Ames, Nick Baskowski, Helen Armstrong, Felix Mirando, Patrick Coffey, Erwin Sklar.
Please join now in a responsive reading by Sylvia Kamens and Rabbi Jack Reamer. Your response is, we remember them. At the rising of the sun and at its going down, we remember them. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. At the blueness of the skies and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. As long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them. Let's take a moment together in silence. We have 3 readings for summer and Sabbath. Wendell Berry is an American poet, a novelist, a farmer, and someone who has been a lifelong advocate for respect and care of the natural world. Beth Ann is going to read for us an excerpt from a poem in his Sabbath collection. It's a very extensive collection of what he calls Sabbath poems, and this one was written in 1980.
The warbler, with its quivering striped throat, would live almost beyond my sight, almost beyond belief, but for its doubled note. Among high leaves, a leaf, at ease, at home in air and light. And I, through woods and fields, through fallen days, am passing to where I belong, at home, at ease and well, in Sabbaths of this place, almost invisible, toward which I go from song to song.
No. This poem is by Wallace Stevens, a 20th century American poet who lived from 1879 to 1959. He spent most of his life in Hartford, where he had a day job as an insurance executive. And like the poem by Carolyn Miller that we heard earlier, this one evokes the deep stillness of a solitary summer night. It's called "The House Was Quiet and the World Was Calm." The house was quiet and the world was calm. The reader became the book, and summer night was like the conscious being of the book. The house was quiet and the world was calm. The words were spoken as if there was no book, except that the reader leaned above the page, wanted to lean, wanted much most to be the scholar to whom his book is true, to whom the summer night is like a perfection of thought. The house was quiet because it had to be. The quiet was part of the meaning, part of the mind, the access of perfection to the page, and the world was calm. The truth in a calm world, in which there is no other meaning. Itself is calm. Itself is summer and night. Itself is the reader, leaning late and reading there. And finally, I have a ditty that I wrote many years ago. I think I shared it once in a Pioneer article years and years ago. And maybe because I have a July birthday, I always felt that I changed and grew over the summer, and in the fall I was a slightly different person when I was young. Summer's children learn and grow, summer's harvest lush and slow, sounds, sensations, smells, and sights, summer days and summer nights. Ants on sidewalks and on floors, arguments that spill outdoors, blue above and waves of blue, smoke from next door's barbecue, car tire screeches, car horn blares, caterwauling critters, dew, dense air, dogs and deals and dreaming sleep, dead man's float, diving deep, everlastings, elderberries, elves in woodlands making merry, fudgesicles, flags, fireflies, look park picnics, 4th of July, games and gardens, hose and hats, ice cream cones and scooping jacks, kites and lifeguards, lemonade, mildew, nicks that need first aid, ocean breezes, water park sprays, roses, Red Sox, rainy days, sunburns, sunsets, singing stars, dirty toes, sticky tar, summer days and summer nights, sounds, sensations, smells, and sights, summer's harvest, lush and slow, summer's children learn and grow.
Now we invite you to join us in singing Summertime and then In the Good Old Summertime. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. That is number 3 of the 10 commandments, the commandments that were received by Moses on Mount Sinai before history began. An ancient law that has been followed and interpreted and ignored in various ways by Christians and Jews down the ages. Jonathan Edwards, who was one of the brightest and most influential religious scholars of the American colonial period, and a Northampton native, wrote, "We are strictly to abstain from being outwardly engaged in any worldly thing, either worldly business or recreations, because, quote, the Sabbath day is an accepted time, a day of salvation,
a time wherein God especially loves to be sought and loves to be found. In 1671, the Mass Bay colony included the following in its legal charter. It says, "Whosoever shall profane the Lord's day by doing unnecessary servile work, by unnecessary travailing, or by sports and recreations, shall forfeit for every such default 40 shillings or be publicly whipped. But if it clearly appear that the sin was profoundly, presumptuously, with a capital P, and with a high hand committed against the known command and authority of the blessed God, such a person shall be put to death or grievously punished at the judgment of the court." Well, I don't know if anyone was actually ever put to death under that provision. I hope not, but I'm guessing that at least a few 40-shilling fines were paid. Keeping the Sabbath holy was a pretty serious matter, and throughout the country's history, many states have had so-called blue laws prohibiting various types of activity on Sunday, and all of those laws and all of these practices had their initial justification in a strict interpretation of the Bible's third commandment. I think most of you are not at all too young to remember when Massachusetts liquor stores were closed on Sunday, except, and I had forgotten this, in more recent times, those within 10 miles of the New Hampshire or Vermont border were allowed to be open. Finally, that law went off the books not until 2004. Listen again to Jonathan Edwards. He served First Church Northampton from 1727 to 1749. The first 2 years he was his grandfather's assistant, and the next 20 he was the lead minister. First Church, as many of you know, is our mother church, whom we left because of our unresolvable theological differences back in 1824, 1825. But we can claim Edwards, if we choose to, as one of ours. And again, he wrote, "In keeping Sabbath, we are to abstain from being outwardly engaged in any worldly thing, because the Sabbath day is an accepted time, a time wherein God especially loves to be sought and loves to be found." Sabbath is a time when hope or peace or connection or deep knowing or God especially loves to be sought and loves to be found, both sought and found. So if we set the Bible aside and we set aside what feel like foreign, ancient, and restrictive, superstitious ideas, we might ask ourselves, what can taking Sabbath mean now? And last week we spoke about resilience. Taking Sabbath can be a way of renewing our reserves of strength, hope, and determination to go on. So this is an invitation to you to consider how you're renewed, if and how you can find and take, in Edwards' words, an accepted time where hope or peace or deep knowing or solace or connection or God loves to be sought and found. And the reason this subject goes with summer, I think, at least for me, summer is the season when I am most likely to find my own Sabbath time, whether at night in the sticky heat, as Carolyn Miller wrote, or as Barry wrote, through woods and fields, passing to where I belong, at home, at ease, and well. A Sabbath of place. In the woods, in the garden, by a stream or a lake, or, for me, rarely now, by the ocean. And some of you who write or like to read deeply may resonate with that mood and images Wallace Stevens evokes in the poem, "The house was quiet and the world was calm. The calm was necessary." Necessary to becoming one with the words, with the process of reading. deep knowing, connection. Until and unless in Wallace Stevens' Calm Night, maybe there were arguments that spilled outdoors, or car screens, or an ambulance siren whirring. For most of us now, the world is far from calm. It is too much with us, which is a line that comes from a poem by the 19th century romantic poet William Wordsworth, who in that poem is lamenting the impact of industrialization on human life and on the natural world. The world is too much with us. So Sabbath to me means an intentional time to put that world at a distance, an extended intentional time when both work and recreation are set aside. And a time when all the problems we are constantly asking our minds to solve are set aside. Because in that space and time, we can find renewal. But the question is, how does anyone set aside work and recreation, and especially all the problems we are constantly asking our minds to solve? How do we set aside the political news, economic worries, worries about our futures, our children's futures, our planet's future? Some people, I know some of you, achieve this kind of time apart through a consistent meditation practice. And I had a teacher in seminary who began her classes with a centering practice. We tried this actually in our meditation circle a couple weeks ago. She invited us to put our feet on the floor, close our eyes, take some centering breath, and then to put down everything that could get in the way of being fully present. Traffic, trouble finding a legal parking space, family worries. Set them down, she would say, just at your feet, not far away, close enough for you to pick them up again easily when you need to. But set them down for now. And as I said, I remembered this recently, and we tried it in our meditation circle, and I've started doing it again before I begin my own time of meditation, naming the things that are on my mind and setting them aside rather than waiting for them to buzz around in my head as soon as I try to come into silence. Some of us find Sabbath in alone time, but it doesn't have to mean silence and solitude. For several years when our boys were young, we joined my siblings and their spouses in renting a house on Martha's Vineyard for a week at the end of the summer. And Oak Bluffs is still in my memory a place of Sabbath. The ferry ride was both a real and symbolic removal from the mainland life, our mainland life that was overfilled with work and school and music lessons and soccer practices and camp and whatever. Although I have to say, soccer balls did find their way into the station wagon with the rest of the gear. That week was the kind of Sabbath I invoke in my little summer ditty: sand and waves and ice cream and staying up late and fireworks and silly games, and even maybe a chance to read a good book. There were afternoons when one of my sisters would take our kids to the beach, and that was when Booker and I would get a few hours to ourselves. Each of us can and must, I think, find Sabbath in more than one way, in our own ways, in our own places. And I hope and I believe that many of us are finding Sabbath here in a Sunday worship service of all places, in what John Millspaugh, in our opening words, called a holy time in a community of seekers. We are finding Sabbath together, and for that, and for so much else, I am grateful. And our final hymn is number 128, if you have a hymnal, For All That Is Our Life, and the words will go up on the screens.
others serve, for services we give, for work and its rewards, for hours of rest and love, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life. For sorrow we must bear, for failures, pain, and loss, for each new thing we learn, for fearful hours that pass, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life. For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift, which we are called to use, to build the common good, and make our own days glad.
As we remember those we have loved and lost, as we seek the ways and places of Sabbath, let us remember that all life is a gift, and let us be glad. Go in peace, and now join in singing George Harrison's wonderful "Here Comes the Sun."
Darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun, here comes the sun, and I say, it's alright. Little darling, the smiles return into their faces. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been clear. Here's the sun, here comes the sun, and I say, it's alright. Sun, 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 here it comes. Sun, 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 here it comes. Sun, 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 here it comes.
Thank you, Dana, Greg, Christine, thank you, thank you, thank you.